All right. A few minutes late. Apologize for those of you that were sitting there waiting for us to get on. Like uncharacteristically, we get a lot of views after the fact for a lot of these presentations, and maybe I've taken too many liberties on that. And now we have an audience that's actually sitting here waiting for us. So I apologize for us getting started a few minutes late, and thank you for hanging on and waiting for us to get our butts in gear and get going. With me today, I have there we go. With me today, I have Leighton from KnowHow, and then I also have two CFO controller type experts from the industry. And our intention, pretty simple. We're going to walk through the cost of doing business survey. And we're going to highlight some specific questions that if you're completing the survey, you might have questions about where to go to get the data or how to interpret your data into what the survey is asking for. That's our general intention. I'd encourage everybody, if you have any questions, go ahead, use the live chat feature or the comments. We see those on our end, and we'll do our best to go ahead and answer them. But before we get started and I share my screen, I wanted to give a moment for brief introductions. We'll go ahead and start with Leighton.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. So Leighton, I'm the CEO at KnowHow. And KnowHow, we are a software app that restorers use to be able to standardize all their processes and procedures and knowledge across their workforce in every department, including, those processes that constitute closing the books every month. But KnowHow is an app that onboards, trains, and supports workers to be able to deliver work according to company standard in all the departments.
All right. Thank you. Tiffany, why don't you give us a little bit of information about yourself?
Hi, I'm Tiffany Bear. I'm the owner of Bear Bonson Business Services. So we're a managerial accounting firm that specializes in the restoration industry. I was a GM of a restoration company, so I've been there, done that with you guys. I know what it's like, so it gives me a little bit of a different perspective on the industry. So I know the financial information you guys need out of your reports, and so that's what we do is we help our clients get that information.
Awesome. And then Carl, you're sitting outside. It looks wonderful.
Yeah. No, it's beautiful right now. It's about 85, 87 degrees right now. It's beautiful.
Right
Not like in Hawaii, but it is nice. I'm Carl Sant. I've been a controller for a independent restoration company for around 20 years right now. My biggest experience is probably dealing with data, extracting data out of databases and getting the information that everybody needs in the company.
Yeah. Awesome. So my first question is not on the survey, but a simple layup question. If you are a controller or a CFO and your boss, the business owner, has said, all right, I've decided we're doing this thing, go fill out this survey. Leighton, why don't you tell us the importance and the relevance of what we're trying to accomplish here with the cost of doing business survey?
Yeah, Anthony, I think the number one thing is that many people would agree that this is an industry that has many commoditized functions. We do a lot of the same work, we deliver a lot of the same services, we use a lot of the same equipment, we use a lot of the same, frankly, we use a lot of the same consumables. And yet there's a lack of clarity on what does a good P&L look like? Ultimately, what percentages are good percentages? And other industries have invested in locking arms together, like construction and civil industries like that, where they've invested in being able to create those benchmarks that allow new and existing participants to be able to understand where they stand as a financial organization. And when you think about the velocity of financial activity in the industry, the private equity coming in, you think about just the volume of independent companies launching this business, the number of new franchises we see online. So many people are spending money in this industry, and I think they're spending it without a lot of clarity on, am I making good decisions or am I making maybe suboptimal decisions? And so I think that this is an effort to, number one, provide clarity in a way that I think appropriately keeps things confidential. But also, no question, the Restoration Industry Association is an advocate for restorers in the industry. It is a restorer speaking for restorer organization. And so this is an initiative for them to be able to create a defensible, very thorough, very well researched report that it can use to champion causes on behalf of restorers.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And I think in our previous interview with Miss Michelle Blevins on CNR Magazine, Ben Looper famously said, you're going to want to be included in this survey. You as a restorer are going to want your data to be represented within this survey, and that will give you much more standing when you go to share the results of the survey. You'll be able to say, and my numbers are in here. And I think that that's very relevant. Is there a cost to participate in the survey?
There's no direct cost. I mean, a person could say, it might cost you a nice cappuccino for your financial controller. You might need to allow them to close their door and have an hour, of peace and quiet to be able to have some time. I suppose, you might say, well, there's a labor hour there, but the investment, and I would call it an investment, the investment far outweighs any type of cost. There's no cost to participate. The report that we produced will be made freely available. If you're familiar with some of the other reports that we do, like you mentioned, Michelle Blevins, a big fan of Michelle and her team. We produce another report called the State of the Industry Report. It's a very professional report. I think that it stands out as a high quality report. So there's no cost to that report. It's just a resource that the RIA is making available to the industry in collaboration with KnowHow.
Agreed. Now, so Tiffany, if somebody came to you and said, "Hey, I need you to fill this out for me," is it a cappuccino? Is it a steak dinner? What compels you to do it?
I was looking at it and I said, I definitely think it's minimally 2 cappuccinos, but in a snack. But no, I think it's great because one of the biggest questions I get from my clients or new clients coming on is, how do I compare to everyone else? I'm like, well, and the biggest thing I see in all these live chats and different things, I was like, well, are we comparing apples to apples? Usually it's apples to oranges, right? And so that standardization, I think what you said is key, is raising that bar and creating consistency across board, us joining together. So for my clients, 100%, I could go get this information. How it's structured in other companies, I don't know, but I definitely think you're going to be pulling from your QuickBooks or your accounting software, your job management software. So it's definitely doable as long as we're tracking all the data. That's going to be the important part.
That's right. And for you, Carl, what do you want? Shot of whiskey? What's your point? What would get you to do it?
I mean, when I reviewed the questionnaire, it's fairly straightforward. A lot of the stuff actually comes straight out of our pivot numbers, as far as the reports, and then as far as everything else, it's going to come straight from your balance sheet, your income statement, and your job management software.
Awesome. All right, we'll go ahead and dig in here. I'm going to share my screen. Got to remember how to do this. There we go. All right, so we opened the survey with a couple layup questions. Like I said, I'm not going to spend a ton of time. Do you work within a restoration company? Are you a member of the RIA? How many locations does your company have? So we're specifically asking for brick and mortar, right? If you got a PO box in a different county, doesn't count. That's right. Primary location, years in business. This is an interesting question. What is the population size of your primary market area? I'll go ahead and go to Carl first on this one. How would you determine the population size if you didn't know?
The way I did it when I had to get that information was I went straight to Google, and then I just got the population of Franklin County here in Columbus, and then I did we service the 5 surrounding counties within a 60-mile radius, and I could pull that information straight from Google.
Okay. Tiffany, anything else you'd like to add?
Nope, they're pretty much the same. Looking at the census and just seeing how stale it is too. How many years ago, and do we know has there been growth? Like in our area, it's growing exponentially. So what was right a year ago probably isn't right now. So I may make some assumptions, but that's what I would do as well.
Okay, and I'm going to make an assumption and say at the risk of making an assumption that everybody's
Yes.
probably directionally going to know their annual gross revenue for 2023. But this next question is an interesting one. How would you determine the split between commercial and residential? And I'll start with you, Tiffany.
Well, that one's easy for us, for our clients. We actually track that. We track residential versus commercial and CAT jobs also between our divisions, which I know is the next question, but we track that.
Okay. Carl, any nuance to add here?
No, that's pretty much straight from your job management, sir. We have a field that actually captures that information for us.
Okay. And then Leighton, I'll ask a foundational question. Why are we asking this one?
Well, we're asking for several reasons. One is that I do think it's important to do that kind of cohort analysis on your revenue sources, because ultimately, your numbers should vary slightly, commercial versus residential. Depending on the source, there is some variation there, but also I can tell you from the state of the industry, the report that we produce, a lot of companies want to move towards commercial, and so understanding kind of what that book of business represents in your company allows you to start to think strategically in terms of, as opposed to more is not a strategic term, right? Like we want to do more, right? We need to actually understand what percentage commercial represents currently. So one of the questions you asked earlier, Anthony, which I think is a very important question, is what's the value of doing this report? One of the things that I've heard from I was just walking the conference floor here. I'm at an event in Orlando. Someone who came up to me and participated and did the survey, they said it was actually such a healthy exercise because I produced, in a sense, it forced me to produce a concise summary that I was able to put to the leaders in the company. And we just had never thought to just summarize it, in just a very crisp and concise way. And it sparked an internal conversation for us that's helped us to think more strategically this year. So short answer is, I think that as companies begin to think strategically, as the industry starts to shift more towards a kind of a commercial mix, I think it's important for companies to think about the rev mix as it's split between residential and commercial, and a lot of them are splitting residential commercial, and they're adding another layer of segmentation with whether the job originated from a TPA or not.
Yep, agreed. Go ahead.
Can
Tiffany, sorry.
I just want to jump in and just say, like, one of the things that the reason we do this and the service lines like reconstruction mitigation contents is we break it out for your AR turnover, your day sales outstanding, like how long are you converting your invoices into cash, and from each of those service lines. And then also to your marketing efforts, like where is your income coming from and why, and how efficient are you? Should you be sowing more marketing dollars into those? So getting that data helps you strategically plan, like you said, on where do you want to take your company. So you got to have that data.
Awesome. Thank you for that. On the split between the different profit centers, right? Reconstruction, mitigation, contents, environmental. How would you answer that question? I'll go back up to Carl.
That basically comes straight from our financial statements. We have cost centers for each one of those revenue streams. That way we can keep track of all that information. So we have at least the revenue and the cost of goods sold by each one.
Got it. Anything to add, Tiffany?
No, we do the same thing. We utilize classes and QBO. That's our primary accounting software that we use. And so that way we can see income and the cost of goods sold kind of like in a department view class tracking or your profit centers.
And I'm going to ask this question. What if I didn't know? Let's say that I didn't have everything broken out by profit center. Can I guess, Leighton?
I would encourage you to, asking someone in finance who builds financial models, what you call guessing, what's called an entire, an entire function of business, right? But
yeah.
But this is not forward looking. Like this is backwards looking. And so because it's backwards looking, meaning it's looking over historical financials, we would ask someone not to guess, or at least if you're going to approximate, try to get it as close as you can. And the reason being is that picture somebody holding this document, going toe to toe with a carrier, going toe to toe with an adjuster, who's arguing and saying, look, I appreciate that, but just that mix is not representative of what it costs me to run my business. And they say, well, give me an example, or what are you comparing this to, or what, and for them to slap this down, and then for them to show, hey, this is the average mix of a company's revenue. At the end of the day, when you understand how we want to empower the average restorer to use this report in its final format, I think you'll recognize that it's worth putting in a little bit more sweat to try to create some segmentation there. If you really don't know, do your best to guess as best you can, and then use this as a good catalyst to say we should start segmenting our revenue mix, because I think it is a good best practice. And I'll put that to Carl or Tiffany, but I think segmenting based on services is important to really understand. Even just what is your most profitable service.
Yeah, engaging in fisticuffs with Carl, I can say Carl's going to want to know.
I concur.
All right. And then for TPA work, similar answers, right? What about average job size? How would you guys go about calculating average job size?
It's basically just a simple calculation for us. All we're doing is we're actually going to our pivot numbers and getting that actual average job size. But I have reports that I can go back and see what my average job size is for years back. So it's an easy number to come up with.
And so I'm going to push you on that. Let's assume somebody doesn't have it and they're not a part of Pivot. How would you do the math?
Depending on what job management software they have, it's fairly simple to just get your sales for the year and get your number of jobs that you've sold. Yep. That's all you've got to do.
Awesome. Anything to add?
I actually break mine down a little bit more, and I actually do it by contents versus mitigation versus structure.
Yeah.
Yes, it's very important to know that, because I always talk about maximizing revenue on the job. No fluff, right? But making sure that you know what your average job size is and where that cutoff is to where you're profitable or not.
Yeah. All right. Next question. Do you use a customized price list? If so, what percentage of your revenue is derived from using a custom price list? I feel like this might be a one where folks would have to approximate. Do you guys, like Tiffany, Carl, do you have any ideas on how you might go and get this information? I'm trying to think. I don't know of any mechanisms of tracking that exist in a job management CRM or within QuickBooks.
No, that is not a number that we'd keep track of.
Yeah. So, and probably the answer is more closer to either 0 or 100%. I would imagine that most folks aren't in the middle, from what I understand, right? They're either doing customized pricing or they're not.
Yes, I would imagine the majority of people either do customized price lists or they just get straight from Xactimate.
I would agree. All right, looking at FTE headcount, right? We've got a number of different buckets. Now, I'm going to have some fun. I'm going to give you guys an employee, like a title of an employee, and you can tell me which bucket they would fall in based on your understanding. Tiffany's like, I didn't sign up for this, man. What are you doing?
Oh, no, I'm going to argue all day about these.
Beautiful. Beautiful. All right. Customer care coordinator, where would you guys put it?
I would put that in a project manager's position.
You'd put that on the project manager. What about you, Tiffany?
And when you say the project manager, are you talking about where it sits on the P&L? Is that what you want to talk about, or?
I'm talking about like head count on this table that's in the survey.
In the group?
Yeah. What group would you put?
I would definitely put him in some type of operational. So based off what you have here, probably the project manager as well. Definitely not admin and HR.
Got it. Give me the logic why. Both of you guys answered differently than I expected you to. This is why this is fun. Tiffany, give me your answer why.
Because even though they're not directly related to producing the revenue of the job, they're an integral part of producing the job. They are
Mhm.
operational, they are functional, they are not overhead like running the company, they are doing the work. So when I structure my P&L, I have two sections of COGS, direct and indirect. So they're in the indirect bucket, so they are still related to producing the job. I'm just not going to easily track their hours related to that job.
Got it. Anything to add, Carl?
No, actually, I put her in I put that person in the exact same spot, project manager. As that would be an indirect cost of sales.
Got it. All right. What about a collections specialist? Where would you put them?
What part of collections? So I tell my clients, so usually all the roles are different, and that's the problem. Like one person calls a role this and they execute different. I have a lot that the coordinators are collecting for the first 30 days, and then after that, it kind of goes to collections. Then I can see that more going to like the accounting and legal side, even internal. But in that first section, it's usually still in operations because you're still talking to the adjuster. You're still quote unquote trying to make that settlement or get everything agreed and paid.
Anything to add, Carl?
No, I would basically put that person in the accounting, finance, AR, AP.
Mhm.
Okay. And my last one, how do I want to title this? Mitigation supervisor.
Mm.
Where would you put that individual? Leighton's chuckling because he's like, I'm going to break these buckets up so much next year for the survey.
Yeah. So when you say mitigation supervisor, do you mean like a field supervisor? Do you mean like a manager? Like what are they doing?
Field supervisor, 50% of their time is probably spent producing work. The other 50% is spent overseeing, managing the team, those types of activities.
I
Are they
guess yeah, I would have to ask if they're salary or an
Yep,
hourly employee.
that's what I was gonna.
Let's say they're hourly. And I'm going to force you to answer both questions, though, just for fun.
Then I would put that in direct hourly labor. When they're
Okay.
working directly on the job, they're going to be in direct. So they might even be a 50-50.
Yep.
Okay.
And I do that with some of my employees also. If they're doing some direct stuff, they're 25% of their time is spent direct and the other part is management. Then they go up into the project manager or project director.
Got it. Tiffany, anything to
Yep.
add?
Yeah, we do something similar, depending on the role. So we do like a shop overhead or a management. So the difference between when they're actually working on a job, between when they're not producing revenue, we do that. And then salary, we don't do it because then your effective hourly rate constantly changes. So it
Mhm.
shouldn't cost more because they, worked more hours than their 40, depending on whether they're exempt or not exempt.
Got it. So the nuance I'll say is, while we cannot rip people in half in real life, we can for the purposes of completing the survey.
Correct.
All right. And Leighton, any context to add?
No, other than what you just said, Anthony, I would just double click on that. At the end of the day, what we're looking at is if a person is wearing two hats and one hat is more of, let's say, kind of that fixed component, that role's not really going to change or move regardless of whether we do 100 jobs this month or no jobs this month, but one certainly is going to be a cost area, then no problem splitting that up. We would say, keep it to, once you're getting into, well, this person, is 0.1%, I would get it down to, I wouldn't go lower than half, like 0.5,
Hmm.
0.5 FTE. I think at to that point, you're really just kind of splitting hairs. But think about roles in terms of units of one, and they can be subdivided into units of two, 0.5, 0.5, but I wouldn't go anywhere beyond that.
Got it. So here's the fun one, and this is where I'm going to try and keep us on track. Now, the question is, where does your company account for project management? Is it essentially what the survey's mining for is indirect job costs? Now, I've had the conversation with both Tiffany and Carl to understand that they would account it as its own line item on the P&L, right? But for the purposes of the survey, we're going to have to pick a bucket. So which bucket would you choose if these were your only two options and you had it broken out?
Cost of goods sold.
Cost of goods sold. Carl, would you agree?
No, I go general administrative overhead.
There you go. See? And who's right? Who's wrong? Nobody, right? It's just
apples and oranges.
Play the game, right?
It's an indirect cost. Yes, it is part. If we come down to a midline, it's not down under general administrative. We have a midline cost of goods sold also.
Yeah.
All right. And then for assets and liabilities, where would you go to get this information? Just, I know it seems like a layup, but somebody might not know, so I'm going to ask the question.
Straight from your balance sheet.
Okay. Anything to add, Tiffany?
Nope. That's where I would go.
All right. Now, percentages of distribution for direct costs. Where would this come from?
This is going to be your P&L common size or percentage of income.
Okay. Carl, you agree?
Yep, it's going to be straight from your cost of goods sold section right before your gross profit.
And then I'll just kick in my own personal nuance because this was some pain I experienced in my early days as an operator. In most financial platforms, there is a checkbox you can check that says percentage of income on your profit and loss statements or your income statements that will do this math for you. So if for some reason that's not showing up in the P&L that you're running, look for that setting. I know it's pretty clear in QuickBooks. Not really sure how it comes through in Sage. I know that it comes through on the PSA side. So just make sure that you have that box checked when you run your income statement so you don't have to do a bunch of math when you're inputting these values.
Well, on 17, it says total 100%. So you're taking your cost of goods sold and then dividing each of those by your cost. So that one wouldn't work for this one. I just realized that you were looking at the percentage of your COGS.
I was, and thank you for catching me on that.
Sorry.
This is why you would never have a guy like me fill out the survey. I'm going to delegate it. All right. Gross margin, right? Pretty simple question. Enter the percentage of total revenue allocated to each category of general overhead expenses. So these are your indirect costs. Again, this is going to be a P&L question, correct?
Yes.
And this is going to be the percentage of all general overhead expenses, not percentage of income.
Yes, I think it's similar to the other one. Yes, you're going to take all your expenses and divide each line item by that total expense.
And they're pretty big buckets, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like most folks have several lines of expenses on their P&L. So they're going to have to do some math and add some things together in order to make sure what they have fits into each of these buckets. Now, I'll ask a foundational question too, because I think it's relevant. Leighton, how did you choose these buckets and why?
Well, it won't surprise you that the survey probably started about 3 times as large, and then we had, we had to prune this bad boy down. And so, and in the same way on a spreadsheet, you are collapsing rows into rows and trying to think about, okay, what do we categorize in this? What do we categorize this? We ultimately had to make some executive decisions around what we thought was going to be one. I think Tiffany had made that earlier around comparisons. So like, what's going to be the most valuable pound for pound comparison numbers for companies? And then what's going to be probably the most broadly generic categories. And some of it is, as we've learned even in this short conversation, some of it's subjective around preferences and styles and how people like to present financials. But ultimately, it went through several rounds of pruning from very capable financial leaders, and didn't agree on everything. But this is what spit out the other side. And one of the things I'll say is that this is kind of that inaugural benchmark year. And then once this survey is in motion, it's our intent to be able to produce this as an annual report And no question, I think that the report will evolve over time as we get feedback, as we have financial leaders like yourselves and financial leaders in the organization to begin to advocate for different ways to present the data. But where we got to today was what was the comment with Ed Cross? It was it spirited debate, or what was it?
Yeah.
Spirited debate. So there was spirited debate, and then we arrived at these categories.
Thank you. Net income, it should be pretty clear. Has your net income increased, decreased, or remained the same? Should be an easy question to answer. Similar on total gross annual revenue. So these questions are, one is based on income and one is based on gross revenue. Enter the total percentage of bad debt or write-offs. So I'll go to Carl. Where would you go to find this?
Basically, I did look at, that's just a one line item on my financial statement or my income statement where I would pull that number and get that as compared to our total revenue for the year.
Similar answer?
Yes. As long as you're doing it correctly.
As long as, so go ahead. You laid it up. I'll double click on it. Give us the nuance there.
Because what I tend to find is a lot of people will just reduce their invoice to whatever they accept, or they don't, they just look at a cash basis, and so they're not writing off that difference where they decreased the revenue they should have gotten. So they're not actually even accounting for it.
And why is that important?
Because that was money that you earned. Like you earned it, and you're just letting it go out the door. So as an operations, we say, okay, why did we write it off? Well, let's go back, look at the jobs. Let's see, why didn't we collect, or why did we have to reduce it? So we tie it back operationally to see, is there something we can improve upon to ensure that we're collecting the revenue that was earned.
And I'll ask an even deeper, more intellectual question. I know I've been playing softball here for a second, but at what point would you consider it to be bad debt? Like if somebody's saying, okay, I got a bag of AR that I've been hanging on to for a while. It's not looking good. Like, where do you draw that line?
I mean, I can tell you when I draw the line, my drawing of the line is when I send it to a lawyer. That's when I write it off. It just automatically goes to bad debt. And if I receive the money after it's gone to a lawyer, it comes back into the P&L on recovered bad debt.
Yep.
Got it. You'd agree, Tiffany?
Yeah, I usually in this industry, because I sometimes see like the day sales outstanding is a little longer. So usually, typically 90 to 120 days after that, you're being collected is highly unlikely, or it's going to be very reduced. And so whenever you're going into lien status or you're going into like lawyers, that's typically, you should just write it off.
Yeah. And I would tend to align with those definitions. Like what kind of my more universal one is whenever you've said, I'm done trying, right? Like you've exhausted all your options. That always tends to, because if you're involving legal, if you're calling collections, if you're, placing liens, like those tend to be the hash marks at which once you cross past that, you're like, okay,
yeah,
it's bad debt. Percentage of labor completed by the following, what percentage of labor is completed by the following subcontractors? So what are the options that are below this question, Leighton? It seems like this is multiple choice.
Yeah, so this is going to be multiple choice, and it's going to allow you to determine ultimately you'll see just simple breakdowns, kind of that 10, 20%, 25, 25 plus.
Oh, got it. Okay.
And so I think ultimately the root of the question is there is some companies are very in-house heavy, and somehow companies sub out a lot of work. And so just to have some clarity on that, as certainly those cost centers, they can vary quite a bit based on companies that just have a different labor mix.
Got it.
Mhm.
So what percentage of your average gross margins applies to the following types of work? So what is this question? This is the phrasing on this one kind of trips me up a little bit. Leighton, can you give us some, what are we asking for here?
Yeah, it's funny, how we go over these questions and rewrite them and then we spit out the other side what made sense at the final revision. And but in a nutshell, what we're looking for is a breakdown of in a pie graph. If you were to picture what this data is going to produce a very elegant pie graph. Of a person's revenues, if a person did, the average restorer in the industry last year did about $2.4 million of restoration work. And so if we were to subdivide that across all these categories from source, so we would say source would be an additional category. And so if you were to picture, for example, residential work is different shades of blue, then we would say, well, within that wedge that is residential, could you break it down a little further? And so doing is you're going into residential versus commercial, and then you're going to what was the source of that job within that category.
Got it. So, Carl, if you had to answer this one, where would you go to get the data?
I would be running reports out of, because he's asking for general or for gross margins. That would probably be coming from my financial statements, but we do keep track. The only thing I'd have to do is try to figure out how to do the TPA.
Yep.
That's it. Everything else is very simple. It's just what percentage is TPA versus non-TPA, which in my case, it's very small percentage, but.
Yep. And so if you knew the lead, the percentage of leads, you could approximate for the revenue based off of it.
He's asking for the gross margin though, so that's going to be a little bit more difficult to get. You're going to have to get that from your financial statements.
Yeah. Anything to add, Tiffany?
I would say this one would be a lot of back end work for me. Yeah, because just trying to find the gross margin between direct or the TPA characters. So we usually don't do TPAs on most of our clients, but yeah, there would be a lot of back end calculations probably on this one.
Okay.
And one thing I'll add to that, Anthony, is that I think that in the saying is is the juice worth the squeeze, right? I mean, one of the questions that we want this report to be able to answer is, one of those proverbial questions is, which type of work is the most profitable, right? And that is a question that eludes a lot of restorers, right? A lot of times we take the work that comes in the front door and we act in a very reactive way when it comes to revenue, as opposed to getting on the offense and starting to think about what type of work do we want to optimize the machine that is our company to both pursue, receive, and service. And that should start with a gross margin conversation, not a we like this type of work conversation.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
In my opinion,
Yeah. In your estimation, what percentage of last year's budget was allocated to external learning, training, and development for your business? So this is a percentage of revenue question.
Yes.
Finally got one right. How much of the aforementioned learning and development spending would you say was spent specifically on developing internal managers or leaders? I guess my question on this question is, we're just trying to solve for whether or not we spend it on internal, or what are we trying to suss out for with this one, Leighton?
So what we're trying to understand is an emerging challenge, an emerging obstacle, let's call it emerging crisis in the industry, is are we developing the next level of management, next level of leadership? And so in the 2022 and 2023 State of the Industry reports, one of the things that we identified was that the industry is beginning to recognize that it has to make much larger investments in the training and development of its organization. Mm-hmm. And the question is where are those dollars being spent? Are we spending it on what can be the turnstile of our frontline staff, or are we actually making what we would say is more long-term investments in soft skills and more managerial type development, where we're adding what I would say is more depth to our roster.
Mhm.
And so that's what we're getting at, is we're trying to understand, are we allocating those learning and training dollars to kind of tip of the spear kind of firefighting training, as opposed to, are we actually really establishing the depth and kind of that foundation of our team?
Got it. Okay. Next few questions. Do you anticipate recruiting middle and senior level managers? And to fill your future management positions, do you prefer to hire externally to fill the positions or promote internally? These seem pretty simple to answer. And then our last question is basic information about the organization. And that is our survey. So 30 questions.
30 questions, Anthony. And let me speak to that last one, because a person that would take the survey and say, well, my understanding was that the survey was confidential, so why am I providing this information? And let me just provide 2 quick bullet points on that. Number one is your submissions are confidential. Anyone who sees this data, which is a very small cohort, signs a non-disclosure agreement. And but we need this information because a person, I know it may sound kind of silly, but a person could game the system, right? A person could game the system. And so what we're asking is, by providing your name, your title, and the company, we're trying to identify 2 things. One, you are in fact a restorer, right? That's number one. And number 2 is that you are in a role where you would have access to this information. So if a very keen water mitigation technician decided to log in and complete this, the fact of the matter is that we would be doubtful, as an organization who's trying to make sure we have data we can stand behind, we would be doubtful that you had access to that information. And so we do want to identify the title of the person participating, because we think that that's important to be able to validate that the responses given come from a person who has a complete picture of the organization. And you can say, well, that's not the best checks and balance. Well, we think it's a reasonable check and balance. And then, but beyond that, the report won't have any type of direct identifiers.
Got it. Awesome. Well, Leighton, where can people go if they're interested in taking the survey? Let's say that they've evaded us thus far. They didn't show up to the conference. They didn't catch our podcast with Michelle. They've missed Ben Justinson's repeated comments on social media about the survey, my attempts, personal phone calls, threats upon their organization. Like a lot of us have been doing a lot to promote this thing.
Carl's,
this is the first time you're hearing about it. Where can they go?
Yeah. We've tried to make it very simple. Costofrestoration.com, costofrestoration.com, and they can go to that. It asks them to fill out a form, just a very light form fill, and that directs them to the survey. The survey is, you're not going to be logged into some Google form or Survey Monkey. You're stepping into a Qualtrics environment. And so you're immediately in a very robust survey software. And so that video provides a very crisp overview. So if perhaps someone on your team wasn't part of this webinar and you want to send them this, and that video can provide an overview. And then here it's providing some frequently asked questions around how the data is used, how privacy will be handled. But you're going to costofrestoration.com, or you're forwarding that URL over to someone on your team with the right credentials. And by filling out that form, they're being directed to the survey itself. And then it's really about, get that, as Tiffany would say, get those 2 cappuccinos in that snack, throw a playlist on that you enjoy, and follow Carl and Tiffany's advice and knock this thing out.
Awesome. Tiffany, Carl, do you guys have any comments to close us out with? I'll ask a more pointed question. Should anybody be afraid of this survey?
No, I think it's a good eye opener if you don't already know the information. it may give you an aha moment and to help better, start looking at where you want to go with your company. A lot of my clients, they're a little scared when they first get the numbers, but once we start coaching them and teaching them, then they get eager, and then they just get so more passionate about their company. You can see like the newness and the eagerness to grow and go, like they get revived. So I would highly encourage you to jump in and look at it and see where you're going.
Yeah,
Anything to add?
the only thing I could add to that is it took me approximately 45 minutes to an hour to get this information put together. The hardest thing was the TPA versus other revenue. That was the most difficult thing to get put together. And just to remind everybody, the more data we can get, the more data we're going to be able to analyze. And it's going to be all the better for the information that you may get out of this RIA survey.
Yeah, I would agree. And thank you to everybody who is putting forth the effort. It is the first of its kind for our industry. It's data that I've been in the industry now for 2 decades, and if I can only imagine what I would have done with this information if I would have had it, as opposed to just flying blind for the past 2 decades, right? Like there's some great power and good that's going to come out of it, and I'm personally excited. Thank you to Leighton and his team at KnowHow for graciously putting it together to benefit the industry. Thank you to the RIA for championing it and making it a priority, so then that way we can have access to this information. And thank you to Tiffany and Carl. You guys didn't have to be here. I didn't have to do anything other than ask to get you to show up today, and that warms my heart. And I appreciate you both for taking the time to help us make the industry a better place.
Of course.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Happy to be here.
Yeah.
All right. I'll go ahead and sign us off. You guys want to hang on 1 second?
Yeah. Thanks, Anthony.